another thing where we kind of have to flesh out the details and be open to it, talk it through, see what's true, what's not, make maybe some fair analysis of it, is a new sexual harassment allegation against Elon Musk, who folks know we're a big fan of, but we also strive to be, fair. This is a big story. We're not going to not cover it just because we like the guy. But Business Insider reported this big bombshell story, essentially accusing Elon Musk of having inappropriately exposed himself to an air stewardess during one of his flights, and basically like saying inappropriate things to her, propositioning her, something that, if true, that's a big if, right? But would be a clear-cut case of sexual harassment, not sexual assault. It's not a rape allegation or something of that sort. It's still very serious, but it's important to differentiate the distinctions there, because sometimes in MeToo coverage, those all get conflated together. And I think that's important to differentiate. Now, the Business Insider story also reported that SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, paid the woman a $250,000 settlement for her misconduct claim to settle it out of court. And now some people are running with this like a bombshell, like, oh, this proves it's true. But actually, no, Law 101, a settlement doesn't involve any admission of guilt. It is essentially risk minimization. They're not going to risk this going to court. And Elon is now denying this. He's saying it is politically motivated because he has, said he was going to vote Republican. He's come out with a lot of things critical of the left lately. Now, to be clear, this reporting was actually happening. It was in the works before he came out as voting Republican. So it's not a response directly to that, but it could be, maybe a response to his general political tilt. For me, one other thing that I want to just raise as potential concern with this allegation and this story is that the source for it is not actually the alleged victim. It is the alleged victim's friend who says this happened and has a statement from the time that she provided during the settlement. But the actual victim has not come forward and accused Elon Musk of anything. Now, the flip side of that is that she may be bound by an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which are really problematic for me because in theory, it's like a contract, voluntary agreement between two people. I give you this, you won't speak out about this. But also sometimes, and I'm not saying this is the case in the Musk case, I have no idea, but sometimes they're kind of coercive where you're heavily pressured into signing this away, and NDAs can be really messy. But I guess my take on it right now is just to not jump to any conclusions and see what information comes forward. These things tend not to be one-offs. I would say maybe there's an exception for everything, but typically no man just commits sexual harassment once and never ever again in his life. Like if Elon actually is, a predator or somebody who crosses lines, I would have to imagine that there would be many other women who would come forward eventually, right? Because it would be strange to me if it was just a one-off thing. And I also really would like to hear some details or verification or proof from the alleged victim herself. So my stance right now, and I'm curious what you think, Hannah, it's just kind of wait and see approach.
Yeah, I think that's all we really can do in these instances. I mean, there's so many layers to this that I think you correctly called out. First and foremost, when it comes to NDAs, I too find them largely problematic. I mean, it's a contract. It is your, choice to sign one. I personally would rarely agree to do it. But the reality is that oftentimes when people, specifically people who are not in positions of power, find themselves in working relationships where these things happen, they don't really have much of a choice. It's like, if you're this woman, you've been sexually harassed by your boss, you come forward, you're trying to say this happened, and they're basically like, listen, you're going to lose your job. You're not going to work here anymore. It's going to be a terrible working environment for you. You can take this money and be quiet, or we can try to go after you and pursue, legal action against you and make it where you can't work again. Who knows what else, right? And so I think a lot of people get kind of boxed into signing these things. So I do find them somewhat abusive in practice. But also, I think it's kind of a murky line when it comes to the legality of them. And then you got to go into the actual sort of nuance of the story. I think the timing of him coming out and saying I'm going to start voting Republican, wait for all the attacks to start coming out, knowing that this story was about to break. It seems like he had been approached for comment before it was about to come out. Like, that's pretty fishy to me. And obviously I think he was trying to play into like the right-wing conspiracy theories that that only the right-wing men are targeted with these kinds of stories, which is not true. We've seen many leftist men also be called out under the MeToo umbrella. So I just don't know, but I also think it's hard to come forward as a woman when you have been in any way sexually violated. I think very few people have cause to lie about it, even people who do take money and sign NDAs. It's a very scary thing to do. Litigation is a very scary process to go through. Being a victim is a very traumatizing thing to go through. All in all, I am inclined to believe women when they come forward, but there should be due process, there should be evidence. And since she chose to not pursue charges and instead go the settlement route, it's unlikely we'll get that kind of real ability to flesh this out.
Yeah, and so then what do you do? Do you just cancel somebody without really ever being able to reach any sort of definitive conclusion? It seems messy for me, and I think the answer is probably not, in my opinion. I also think that it is absolutely true that in everyday life, a tiny fraction, just a few percentage points of rape accusations or sexual assault accusations are false or fabricated. But I also believe that when people accuse someone publicly, I also believe not a lot of them are probably fake or false. People don't throw that around lightly, but it's definitely not only 2%. The same sample size is different. People will say this. They'll say like only 2% of rape allegations prove out to be fabricated. So Brett Kavanaugh's accuser should be believed by default. And it's like, well, you can't really take statistics that apply to everyday life where there's not the same incentive to hyper politicized, extremely rich individuals. Obviously, that's going to be a different sample set. So I think we do have to be much more skeptical of these kinds of claims, because I am left wondering why now. I mean, he's been wealthy and influential for many years. I'm not saying that she's lying. I don't know. And I don't like when people just jump to assume that. There's this meme going around on the right where it's like Elon Musk says, I spoke out about the left and they faked Me Too allegations against me. And then it shows next to him Donald Trump and Brett Kavanaugh going, first time? And I'm like, that's, first off, like 20 plus people accuse Trump, so not quite the same. And it's... We just can't be reactionary to the point where we assume everything's fake, false, fabricated, but we also can't just throw down the hammer on people. So I think it's a tricky situation. I'm always inclined to give people due process and the benefit of the doubt, but also the stuff needs to be taken seriously. And I hope we learn more.
Yeah, and I'll just add to this, as a victims advocate, I always encourage women to go the legal route. I know our system's faulty. I know it's hard. I know it's very difficult to get justice, but it's better to at least stand your ground, maintain your story, and try to go after that if you're actually seeking this kind of justice. Because when you decide to do settlement routes, when you decide to do NDAs, when you decide to just do whisper campaigns on social media or in the mainstream media saying this happened, it's going to be a lot harder for people to ascertain what actually happened and to really pick a side. So I really do think, like, as difficult as it is, we need to push for structural changes in our system that actually test rape kits, that actually prosecute people for these crimes. But also we as women and men who are victims as well have to be diligent about actually pursuing the legal route and actually getting convictions on these things. So that's kind of my 2 cents. All right.